Dear church, let's talk about preachers looking for a church with Jason Thompson. Dear church, let's talk Holy Spirit, transformation, prayer.
6 days, right?
And if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Our culture wants to define you by your sexuality. We know that our identity is found in Christ. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley, joined by, I say this every week, Jason, my good friend. You and I became friends probably 5 years ago as you and I were looking at kind of a job situation, and you are one that helps connect ministers and churches. That's one of the many many hats that you wear. And we hit it off immediately. And I wanted to have you on today because when I'm thinking about this whole preachers looking for a church, you're the person that came to mind for me, because we talk a lot about churches looking for a minister. We've had podcasts on that. But what about the preacher that's considering a new work? What should they look for? What should be on their priority list? Because it's got to be a right fit, doesn't it?
Well, first, I think it's remarkable that someone who's never been a preacher does a lot of connecting preachers to churches and vice versa. So
we were going to say that.
I grew up in a very small church where the preacher drove down for the Sunday services and poured into our church and loved me so much. And so I've got a long history of being around some great preachers. In the heritage that I grew up in, the preacher probably was, in fact, we called him the preacher, right? He was the preacher. And I think we've lost a little bit of respect for that role and how important that role is. It's easier now to beat up on preachers. It's easier now to find fault with preachers. And man, I think it's one of the reasons why so few people want to go into preaching.
Yeah.
And we've got to reclaim a way forward that helps young people and young adults to see the role of preaching to be one that is life-giving and life-changing. So I've just been working with churches for over, consulting with churches for over 20-something years. And I've been at Harpeth Hills, where I served for the past 21 years. And I'm the executive minister here, which means I get to have a front row seat to just how hard the preacher works and how important the relationships are between the preacher and the rest of the staff and the preacher and the eldership. And so I think you're right. I'm a one-trick pony. I don't do a lot of preaching. I don't do a lot of writing, but I really have been blessed to connect a lot of people together for the sake of the kingdom.
Yeah, and I appreciate your work in that. Talk a little bit about the, when you're working with a church and they're looking for a preacher, and you're talking to that preacher and he's looking at the work and he's interested, and so the talks are going further. What is it that you tell the eldership at a congregation to help make the job look attractive, or to help them understand this is what you need to do to get this guy, right?
We're in a whole new realm where if someone's being too aggressive in pursuing a church, it's almost a warning sign for an eldership to be concerned that why is the person trying to get away from the role they're presently in, or what's been the issue? So I think it's been in a new order that now elders and search teams are having to develop clarity around where are we going so that we can invite Chris McCurley to come and help lead us and help join us. And so developing that sense of what is, and I have a high view of God and his movement. I'll give you to explain it. I believe in, thank God for medicine. I thank God for doctors. I thank God for nurses. I thank God for all the research being done that's in institutions, but I still believe in the power of just praying and that God is close and that God is near. Yes. So the part that maybe I didn't always appreciate growing up, that I'm learning to appreciate more and more, is we have to discern what is God uniquely doing in our context in this city for this season, and who is the right person to come partner with the leadership to be the next preacher. So if an eldership in a church does not know already where they're going, it'd be hard to recruit someone. And that's
Yeah.
the role we're in now. I think churches are having to be thoughtful. I don't want to over spiritualize this, but it is a moving of God, but it's a little bit like spiritual headhunting. What kind
Yeah.
of church are we,
Uh-huh.
and where are we going, and who do we need that could help us keep moving in the right direction? So
Yeah.
articulating that, doing the work around that. You're at a great church now. You're at Walnut Street, right?
Yes, sir.
That church, I know enough about that church to know that it wanted to be a conscience for that community. It wanted for the city of Dixon and beyond to know the gospel, to know that
Yes.
Jesus is the only way. And
Yes.
they wanted someone who had the heartbeat and the passion for evangelism who would be a part of their team. And so they wanted Chris McCurley. Well, that's different than let's just hope we get a good preacher.
Right.
Hey, let's get somebody who can preach 2 sermons Sunday morning, Sunday night. It's a whole different thought process of who are we and where do we believe God is taking us, and then who is the right person to come partner with us that we go together. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. You said 2 things there that I want to hit on because I love it. Number one, the term partnering. We've used that here at Walnut Street, that when Ted Williams, one of the elders here, reached out to me, just initially, very first reaching out, he said, "What would you think about coming up here and talking about kingdom work?" And that's all it was. Not, hey, let's have an interview, come up and meet everybody. It's like, how about you come up and let's talk about kingdom work? And we talked in that, and we have since then too, how we are in a partnership. And, I think we can look at elderships, and we often do, as they're the boss and you're the employee. And, I hear preachers say sometimes, well, I don't work for the elders, I work for God. Yeah, but God doesn't sign your paycheck. So I get it that the elders the buck stops with them, and in a very real sense, they are the boss, right? But I think the whole dynamic works best when both sides realize we're partners in this. You're my shepherds, I'm your preacher. And I think that's what we have here. And I think I've seen that in a lot of churches, and I think that's what works best. The other thing you said, though, too, that I think is really important is, does your leadership have a clear vision of where they are and where they want to be? And I was very impressed here in that they were very honest about what they were probably not doing well and what they wanted to do well. And, you said it, but they were very interested in community outreach, being involved in the community. I think sometimes our MO is, let's just go out and find a really quality orator, right? Somebody who's just really good at public speaking, who's the best at that. But I think what you said is perfect in that we're looking at somebody who's here to partner with us and sharing the gospel, being a part of this community, reaching people on the fringes, all those kind of things, right? I love how you put that. Let's ask this. What are some red flags? Okay, so I'm a preacher. I'm considering a work. And which, by the way, Jason, one of the lovely ladies on the search committee here, one of my best friends now, she asked me in the interview process, why do you want to come to Walnut Street? And my response was, I don't know if I want to. I mean, y'all called me. I don't know, wasn't trying to be disrespectful. And we laugh about that now. But I think it is important for shepherds to understand that guy is interviewing you as well. So you're not just in the catbird seat doing all the interviewing and you're going to sift through it. They're interviewing you as well. What would be some red flags for the preacher candidate looking at the church he might go to?
Yeah, I think this will answer some of that. So remind me to go back if I don't get it all cleared up. Elder minister relationships is crucial. If you love your elders and they love you, you guys can get through anything.
Yeah.
And and there's just a secret. It's art and science, but it's also a good dose of Holy Spirit and a high view of the Word. So I
Mhm.
drink from the fire hose of 1 Peter 5.
Yeah.
No one has to remind me to be submissive. The
Yeah.
Word reminds me to be submissive, right?
Right.
But the Word
Love
also
it.
says there in 1 Peter 5 that there is the intentionality that we're also mutually submissive to each other.
Mhm.
So a high view of the eldership, but with a mutual submission to each other. So the way I described it is I know tonight that the elders, and maybe they should, the elders can meet tonight and let me go. They're the
Yeah.
elders. I know
Yeah.
that. But they've always treated me like a partner.
Yeah.
And those are the environments where it is sweet to be
Yeah.
in partnership and member and as a minister. So the biggest red flag would be um, any type of spirit of where there's authoritarianism, where
Mm.
the elders see the minister as someone they can boss around, or
Yeah.
the minister thinks he's smarter than the eldership. How arrogant is it for a preacher to think he's smarter than a plurality of elders?
Right.
But the elders have to also recognize that the preacher has been trained. The preacher has giftedness. And so how do they respect his role? And the only thing I can come up with is, again, 1 Peter 5, and that is a high view of an eldership. If a minister does not have a respectful view of an eldership, it won't work.
Yeah.
But if the eldership is not willing to see the minister as a partner, it doesn't work. So
Yeah.
first red flag is there's just some type of hierarchy that's unspoken or spoken where the minister is a hireling.
Yeah.
Run from that.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, God says in 1 Peter 5, he opposes the proud.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to preach. I'm not a preacher. I'm starting to preach. He opposes the proud.
Yeah.
But different versions say he favors, he gives grace, the humble.
Yeah.
And so is there humility in the system? Number two, if an eldership's not willing to share any of their pain,
Mm.
every church has pain. And if
Yeah.
it's a sales job and the church has it all together, they're waiting for you to be the person they can blame for all the mistakes of the past. And they're not
Well,
willing to deal with their
yeah.
anxiety that's built up through the years. And now
Yeah.
you're going to be, as the preacher, the person. So if there's not a transparency about pain in the system, run from it. And then
Yeah.
the third, I would say, is a red flag, is if the eldership is not willing to allow the preacher to live into how God has made him.
Yeah.
You're just a better preacher than I am, Chris. So if someone
I-
expects, to hang with me on this, if someone expects me to become a great orator, then run from that situation. Let me be me. So
Yeah.
if you're going to hire me and my gift sets are pastoral care or leadership or empowering people, and I'm a B- or C in the pulpit, just know what you're hiring. So
Yeah.
that's for the minister. It doesn't do any job. It doesn't do you any service to oversell yourself.
Yeah.
But
I like that.
yeah, so I'm rambling there.
No.
One
No.
thing about vision, I would just say that do that work before you start hiring a preacher, so you know, as a church, the eldership knows where they're wanting to go, because it just works better when you already know who you're trying to be and you bring along the team member. Notice the word team, the team
Yes.
member, the preacher, who can help continue to lead and serve.
I love that, Jason. And I love what you said about transparency, because one of the things that I wanted to know, and I think it's good advice for any preacher looking at a work, is without throwing him under the bus or without giving too much information or sharing things that you shouldn't, why did the last guy leave? What did you guys learn from that? Or that's what you're talking about, exposing the pain. That's something that I always want to know. And then another question I always have is, it's like I've done this many times. I really haven't. But one of the questions that I asked of here is, so like when you guys are together and you're discussing things, even if you don't agree, when you leave this room, is everybody on the same page? Is it a unified front? And of course it was. And we know that's kind of a loaded question because it should be that. But how are you guys rhythmically? Are you guys all on the same page? Are you willing to set aside, maybe preferences in order to move forward? It's something that you mentioned. To me, I look for those things when I'm visiting with the eldership and saying, okay, do these guys seem to really just get along, right? I mean, that's important.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how sometimes the most simplistic is the most profound, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
do the elders like each other? Would be it.
Yeah, that's
If
it.
you don't like each other, or you can pick up on it, do you think if they've not liked each other for 5 years, you're going to be the miracle worker who goes and all of a sudden they like each other?
Probably not. Yeah.
It's a delicate dance because I have such a high view of elders because most of the time they're working full-time jobs.
Yes.
They're volunteering their time. They're being hit with all kinds of cultural questions that we were not being hit with 20 years ago or 10 years ago. The politics are louder than they've ever been.
Yes.
And it's hard. You're paid to do this as a preacher. And so I would also, I know you didn't ask this question, but I would offer it to the preachers.
Yeah, please.
Be gentle to the elders.
Right.
Yes, if you want the elders to be gentle with you, be gentle with your elders and give them a little slack because one is they're doing something the Bible calls worthy.
Mm-hmm. And
then two, most likely they're doing it because they love the church. They love the Lord.
No doubt.
Now, what happens in a lot of church elderships is people who haven't been equipped to be good leaders become elders sometimes. Right. And just either two things. One, the lack of training and leadership skills and qualities, competencies. Or every once in a while you get someone into the eldership that goes rogue or that never had enough power in his own other worlds or he doesn't quite know how to manage power. And you see more pain caused in churches because of power struggles than anything else happens.
Yes.
And all I would offer up is 1 Peter 5. Be humble, be submissive. And if I as an elder or I as a preacher or I as a minister think I know more than the rest of the people in this room, that probably disqualifies me.
Yeah.
I think a little too highly of myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or, most likely, I've always had self-esteem issues, and I come across in a meeting or an elders meeting as the elder who thinks too highly of himself. What's really going on is I'm not willing to be vulnerable and transparent enough to let you know my own struggles. Sure. And I know I'm throwing a grenade there, but I've seen more damage done to churches because of one person.
Yep.
One person, either an elder or a preacher. Often it's one person, either an elder or a preacher, who does not live into the formation of being the fullness of Christ.
Yeah, I've seen it as well. We often, say that a church split is over doctrine, and sometimes it is. But most of the time, it's said to be over that when it's really over personality, preference, politics, pride,
power.
all those P's, power, all of those things. So kind of playing off the red flag question, how about this? I know that when you're working with a church and helping them find a preacher, you've got some questions you're asking them and some questions that they need to be asking of themselves and asking the preacher when he comes in. What questions would you say the preacher candidate needs to ask?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I do think the preacher needs to ask the historical narrative of the church. How did they get to where they are this time?
Yeah.
Again, that merges with, have you ever read Henry Blackaby's Experiencing God?
Yes.
Book? I mean,
yeah, great book.
25, 30 years old, but man,
Uh-huh.
I've got degrees and I've got training in organizational leadership, blah, 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 blah. The best strategic planning model is, where is God already at work? Where do we discern that? And how do we join them? And so I think you want to hear the story about how the church got to where it is. And you want to listen well. I'm a big believer in search teams, not hiring teams. I think elders are the hiring team.
Right.
I'm a big believer in having a cross-bred membership basis of your people come together who can help search the minister out, find someone. And so listen well to the people who are on that team, but also listen well to the elders. Number two, do they really want me as a partner? I'm gonna double down on that over and over again. My wife once asked me how I knew about double down, but that's another conversation for another day.
That's another podcast.
Yeah, you can cut that right in the podcast. But man, that partnership conversation. Am I invited to the elders meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, what eldership wouldn't want the preacher in most of the meetings?
Yeah.
Where's the threat? If the minister is the partner who is truthfully partnered with the elders to lead the church and to feed the church, to disciple the church, for the sake of the gospel, why would we not want the preacher with us? There may be, every once in a while, a family who says, hey, I just would rather the preacher not being here, or they're talking about the preacher's salary or something, but it ought to be the very rare moment that the preacher is not part of the elder conversations.
Yeah.
There are moments that's needed, but it should not be the norm. And for too many of our churches, the preachers are in a different world, the elders are in one world, and we're losing the power and the synergy of that mutual partnership. Third question would be, what are the expectations of my wife?
Yeah, I like that question.
Causes more pain into families and to churches. What I've discovered is, the larger the church, the more freedom that truly the wife has to just be herself.
Yes.
And if you're in a smaller church and you've got 150 folks and you're expecting the preacher's wife to be kind of the queen of the church, who runs the ladies' ministry, who does all these women's events, I would ask us to reconsider that burden we put upon the preacher's wives. Yeah. And I would ask a different question. How has God shaped and wired this person who is the helpmeet, which is a word for strong helper, the strong helper of her husband? What is her role, and how can she be a part of kingdom work in that local church, whatever her abilities and giftedness are? Sometimes we over-spiritualize spiritual giftedness, and we under-spiritualize the way that God's just wired us and our abilities. Yeah. And in Acts, you see over and over language about God moving, God shaping, God preparing. The story of Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch is, there was a divine encounter because God was involved.
Yeah, right.
And so I believe that and whoever the wife is in this equation, that God's been involved in her life.
Yes.
So what are you as elders expecting of my wife? Of course, churches now have all kinds of different schedules, and the place where they're expecting the preacher to preach on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night classes, Sunday morning classes, I would ask the question of, what if I started equipping people to do these things instead of me being the person that does them all. I think if a preacher sees himself as the end all for all things about teaching or preaching, that you may be limiting the gifts and the talents that are in a local church. So expectations about preaching, those are some that come to mind.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point you just made. Is I think oftentimes you see a preacher hired to do everything, and which leaves all the other folks with not much to do. And I had a friend of mine that was looking at a preaching job one time, and it was a long post on an internet site of all the job description, everything that was expected. And his response to them was, well, what are y'all going to do? Because everything laid out was something that should be shared among the members. Now, the preaching and teaching Bible class and things like that, we understand goes with the job. But I mean, it was down to visiting, all those kind of things. And it sends a message that we want you to do everything and we don't want to do much of anything. Not the message they wanted to send, but they unknowingly were sending that message. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Hey, let's close with this question. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to also kind of beat up on the preacher since I beat up on the elders a little bit. I think the preacher has got to love that church for who she is.
Yes.
So in a marriage, it is really damaging that often we might argue with our wives about the things that we fell in love with them about,
right.
And so sometimes I see preachers who go into churches and they think, well, if I'm there long enough, I'll change them.
Right.
And my response is, keep dancing with the one, keep walking with the one, keep loving the person you're with. That's your spouse. Well, the same thing for a church and a preacher.
Yeah.
Don't expect your church to change her personality. Love her for who she is. And more damage is done because preachers kind of get a little frustrated with their churches, or they're not what they thought it was going to be. And my response would be, love the people.
Yeah.
Love the
Great
people,
advice.
And God will bless the ministry, but love the people for who God has brought together in that church for this season.
Yeah.
Whatever that's worth.
No, that's great. And this last question, we've danced all around it and we've answered it really, but anything to add to this idea of what can the shepherds and the preacher do to make this the best possible working relationship? Because I don't think any eldership wants to go and hire a new preacher every 2 or 3 years. Ideally, they would like to get the guy who's long-term and who's going to stay with them 20, 25 years. So what does that look like? How do you ensure as best you can that happens?
Yeah. Once is just being in the same room together a lot.
Yeah.
So if the preacher's not in the room, how can y'all get close to the preacher? So that's number one. Two, the preacher ought to take the initiative to reach out to each elder and to build a relationship. And don't wait for the elder to reach out to you. The elder's working. The elder's got a lot of things going on. You as the preacher ought to be reaching out and building a relationship with each elder.
Yeah.
It all comes down to relationships, and nurture them, work through conflict together. And if the eldership will see the preacher as their partner, and if the preacher will see the elders as his partner, it normally works pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice, Jason, because I think what has really been enjoyable for me, and I think has helped me, is I've always wanted to have a relationship outside that room. So I didn't want our interactions to only be in the context of an elders meeting. So, hey, let's go to the ball game, or let's go to the movies, or
But did you wait to be invited in, or did you take the initiative?
Well, it was kind of a little bit of both. So
Bingo.
I didn't wait, but they jumped ahead of me, and then I took it from there, kind of one of those things. But I'm very blessed in that, in the place that I was at before and where I'm at now, I had really close friendships with our elders, and that makes all the difference, I think.
And you're describing it, right? It's that mutual submission. They wanted to be friends with you. you want to be friends with them, don't wait for 3 years to become friends with your elder.
Right.
If someone's not taking the initiative, you as the preacher take the initiative.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's good stuff, Jason. Hey, for a guy who didn't really think he had a lot to offer for a podcast, and I had to twist your arm a little bit, let's admit it, I had to twist your arm to come on here. You did
I
a
don't even have a
fantastic
social
job.
media account. I mean, come on, man.
Well, I was going to say you can share this on your Facebook page, but I guess you can't then. Hey, thank you so much for being on, Jason. I appreciate you very much. And thank everyone for tuning in. I want to let you know that if you have a question about today's episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a specific question for Jason, we'll forward it to him. I'm sure he'd be willing to answer any question you might have. If you're a church looking for a preacher looking for a church, contact Jason. He is a great resource. And Jason, thanks again. Appreciate you, buddy. And thank everyone for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.